The Dhammapada, Chapter 18, Mala Vagga, Impurities. Verse number 235. Death is near to you. Pandupala sova dani si yama purisa pi chatang upattita uyoga mukhe cha tithasi patheyampi cha tena vijjati. You are now like a withered leaf. The messengers of death are near you. You are about to set out on a long journey, yet you have no provisions for the journey. Verse 236. Strive hard. So karohi tipang attano kipang vayama pandito bhava nidhanta malo anangano dibbang arya bhuming ehisi. Make an island unto yourself. Strive quickly, become wise. Having removed impurities and being free from moral defilements, you shall enter the abodes of the Aryas. Verse 237. Life comes to an end. Upanita vayova dani si sampayato si yamassa santike vaso picha te nathi antara patheyam picha tena vijjati. Your life has come to an end now. To the presence of death you are setting out. You cannot stop on the way, yet you have no provisions for the journey. Verse 238. Be passionless. So karohi deepang attano kipang vayama pandito bhava nidhanta malo anangano napuna jati jarang upehi si. Make an island unto yourself. Strive without delay. Become wise. Having removed impurities and being free from moral defilements, you will no longer be subject to rebirth and decay. The fate of a butcher and his son. Once there was a man in Savatthi who had been a butcher for many years. He also loved eating beef, and every day he insisted on having meat curry with his meals. One day he kept aside some meat to be cooked for the family before going out to have his bath in the river. While he was away, a friend persuaded his wife to sell the meat, and therefore there was no meat curry for the butcher that day. When he discovered this, he became very angry, and he went to the back of his house, promptly cut off the tongue of an ox, had it baked, and sat down for his meal. While eating, the butcher tried to take a bite of the ox tongue, but he bit off his own tongue instead. Now the ox and the butcher were in the same plight. The butcher was in great pain and agony, and blood flowed profusely from his mouth. He had to face a terrible death and was reborn in a miserable state. The butcher's wife was very frightened, and she advised her son to go far away, lest this evil should become a curse and befall him too. So the son went to Taxila. At Taxila, the youth became a goldsmith. Later, he married the daughter of his master, and a few children were born to them. When their sons came of age, he returned to settle down in Savatthi. The sons were devout followers of the Buddha. They were concerned for their father, for he had not done any meritorious deeds in his present existence. So One day, they invited the Buddha and the bhikkhus to their house for alms food. After the meal, they said to the Buddha, "Venerable Sir, we are making this offering to you today on behalf of our father. Kindly give a discourse to help him to realize the Dhamma." So the Buddha admonished the man, "You are getting old. Your body is like a withered leaf. You have to prepare for your future life. Be wise and develop your devotion and spiritual way of life. Perceiving the fleeting nature of worldly life and reflecting mindfully on the admonition given by the Enlightened One, the old man attained the first stage of sainthood." Verse 239. Purify yourself gradually. Anupubbena medhavi thoka thokang khane khane kammaro rajataseva nidhamme malang attano. By degrees, little by little, from time to time, a wise person should remove his own impurities, as a smith removes the dross of silver. A Brahmin attends to the needs of holy man. Once, a Brahmin saw a group of bhikkhus rearranging their robes as they were preparing to enter the city for alms food. He noticed that the robes of some of the bhikkhus touched the ground and got wet because of dew on the grass. So he cleared their path of grass. The next day, he found that as the robes of the bhikkhus touched bare ground, the robes got dirty. So he covered the path with sand. Then again, he observed that the bhikkhus would sweat when the sun was hot, and that they got wet when it was raining. So, finally, he built a shelter for the bhikkhus at the place where they gathered before entering the city for alms food. When the building was finished, he invited the Buddha and the bhikkhus for alms food. The Brahmin explained how he had performed this meritorious deed step by step. The Buddha replied, "O Brahmin, the wise perform their acts of merits little by little, and gradually and constantly they remove the impurities of the mind." Verse 240. One's evil ruins oneself. Ayasava malang samutthitang taduttaya tameva khadati evang atidhona charinang sakha kammani nayanti duggating. Just as rust is formed from iron, and corrodes the iron from which it is formed, so also his own deeds lead the transgressor to a lower plane of existence. A monk who was born as an insect, Tissa. Once there was a monk in Savatthi named Tissa. One day he received a set of fine robes and was very pleased. He wanted to wear them the next day, but he died that very night. And because he was unduly attached to the fine set of robes, he was reborn as an insect, and lived within the folds of the robes. As there was no one to inherit his belongings, it was decided that this particular set of robes should be shared by the other monks. When the monks were preparing to share it out among themselves, the insect was very much agitated and cried out, "They are destroying my robes." The Buddha, on hearing his cry, by means of his supernormal powers of hearing, advised the bhikkhus to dispose of the robes only at the end of 7 days. On the 8th day, the robes which belonged to Tissa were shared out by the bhikkhus. Later, the Buddha explained the reasons for his admonition. Tissa was attached to this particular set of robes at the time of his death, and so he was reborn as an insect for a few days and stayed in the folds of the robes. When you all were preparing to share out the robes, Tissa, the insect, was very much in agony and was running about to and fro in the folds of the robes. If you had taken the robes at that time, Tissa the insect would have felt very bitter against you, and he would have had to be born in a suffering state. Now, however, he has been reborn in a happy state due to his previous karma, and that is why I have allowed you to take the robes. Indeed, bhikkhus, attachment is very dangerous. As rust corrodes iron from which it is formed, so also attachment destroys one and sends one to lower forms of existence. A bhikkhu should not indulge too much in the use of the four requisites or be attached to them, because attachment will delay the process of mental purification. Verse 241. Causes of stain. Asajjhaya mala manta anuttana mala ghara malang vannas kosajjang pamado rakhato malang. Texts not repeated are often soon forgotten. The house neglected soon decays. Sloth is a blemish on beauty. Heedlessness is a blemish on the watchman. The monk who made false claims. Laludai. In Savatthi, people always praise the discourses given by Venerable Sariputta and Mahamoggallana, the two chief disciples of the Buddha. On one occasion, Laludai, on hearing their praises, remarked that the people would also praise him if they were to listen to his discourses. So the people invited Laludai to deliver a discourse. He went up to the platform, but he could not preach the Dhamma. So he requested another bhikkhu to speak first, and that he would take the next turn. In his way, he put off having to speak 3 times. The devotees lost their patience and reprimanded him. "You big fool! When we praised the 2 chief disciples, you were vainly boasting that you could preach like them. Why don't you preach now?" So Laludai left the congregation in shame. When the Buddha was told about the incident, he said, "Laludai has learned very little of the Dhamma. He does not recite the religious texts regularly. He has not memorized anything. Whatever little he has learned gets rusty by not being recited." Verse 242. Taints are evil things. Malitya duccharitang maccherang dadato malang malave papaka dhamma asming loke param hicha. Misconduct is the taint of a woman. Stinginess is the taint of a donor. Taints indeed are all evil things, both in this world and in the next. Verse 243. Ignorance is the greatest taint. Tato mala malatarang avidya paramang malang etang malang pahatvana nimmala hota bhikkhavo. A worse taint than these is ignorance, the greatest taint. Abandoning this taint, be taintless, O bhikkhus. A man whose wife committed adultery. A man's wife committed adultery. On account of his wife's misbehavior, he felt ashamed and avoided all his friends. He also kept away from the Buddha. However, after some time, he went to pay his respects to the Enlightened One. On learning the reason for his absence, the Buddha said, "My disciple, those women who have no moral shame are just like a river, or a road, or liquor shop, or a rest house, or a water pot stand at the roadside. They associate with all sorts of people. Indeed, a loose woman who indulges in sexual misconduct is bound to face ruin." Verse 244. It is easy to lead a shameless life. Sujivang ahirikena kakasurena dangsina pakkandina pagabhena sankilitena jivitang. Easy is the life of a man who is shameless, bold like a crow, a fault-finder, insolent, impudent, and corrupt. Verse 245. It is hard to lead a modest life. Hiding mata che dujjivang nichang suchi gavesina alinin appagabhena suddha jivena passata. Hard is the life of a modest one who ever seeks purity, is detached, humble, clean in life, and reflective. The monk who practiced medicine. Chula Sari. One day, Chula Sari, a physician monk, was returning to his dwelling place after ministering to a patient. On his way, he met Venerable Sariputta and related to him how he had gone to treat a patient, and how he had accepted some delicious food as payment for his services. He requested him to accept some of the food. Venerable Sariputta kept silent and continued on his way. He did not accept the food because Chula Sari had not observed the precept of abstaining from practicing medicine for personal gain. When informed of the matter, the Buddha said, "Bhikkhus, a bhikkhu who is shameless, is coarse in thought, word, and deed, is arrogant like a crow. He will find a comfortable living by unlawful means. On the other hand, life for a bhikkhu who has a sense of moral shame is not easy." Verses 246 and 247. He who does not observe the 5 precepts ruins himself. Yopanang atipateti musavadancha bhasati loke adinnang adiyati paradarancha gacchati surameraya panancha yo naro anuyunjati idhevang eso lokasming mulankanati attano. He who destroys life, tells lies, takes what is not given, commits adultery, and is addicted to intoxicating drinks, digs in his own roots even in this very life. Verse 248. Be not avaricious, and do no wrong. Evang bho purisa janahi papa dhamma asanyata matang lobho adhammocha chirang dukhaya randhayum. Know this, O good man, that evil things are difficult to control. Let not greed and wickedness drag you to suffering for a long time. It is not easy to observe precepts. On one occasion, 5 lay disciples were observing the precepts at the Jetavana monastery. Each of them was only observing one of the 5 moral precepts for Sila. Each observed a particular precept and claimed that that particular precept was the most difficult. As there were disagreements and arguments, they reported their differences to the Buddha, who admonished them. You should not consider any individual precept as being easy or unimportant. The observance of the precepts will lead to your weal and happiness. Do not think lightly of any of the precepts. None of them is easy to observe. Verse 249. The envious are not at peace. Dadati ve yatha saddhang yatha pasadanang jano tatthayo manku bhavati pare sangpana bhojane naso diva va rating va samadhing adi gacchati. People give according to their faith, and as they are pleased. Whoever therein is envious of others' food and drink gains no peace or collectedness of mind either by day or by night. Verse 250. The unenvious are at peace. Yassa chetang samuchinnang mula gacchang samuhatang Save diva va ratting va samadhing adigacchati. He who has this feeling of displeasure cut off, uprooted, and destroyed, gains peace and collectedness of mind by day and by night. The envious are not at peace. Tissa. Tissa, a young novice, had a very bad habit of disparaging other people's good deeds. He even criticized the gifts given by such renowned donors like Anathapindika and Visakha. Besides, he boasted that his relatives were very rich and were like a well where anyone could come for water. Hearing him boast thus, other bhikkhus were very skeptical and they decided to find out the truth. Some young bhikkhus went to his village to investigate. They found out that Tissa's relatives were all poor and that all this time Tissa had only been boasting. When the Buddha was told about this, he said, "A bhikkhu who is unhappy with others receiving gifts and offerings can never attain insight or wisdom." Verse 251. There is no river like craving. Nathi raga samo aggi, nathi dosa samo gaho, nathi moha samang jalang, nathi tanha sama nadi. There is no fire like lust, no grip like hate, no net like delusion, no river like craving. The inattentive lay disciples. On one occasion, 5 lay disciples were present while the Buddha was expounding the Dhamma at the Jetavana monastery. One of them was asleep while sitting. The second was scratching the earth with his fingers. The third was trying to shake a tree. The fourth was looking up at the sky. The fifth was the only one who was respectfully and attentively listening to the Buddha. Venerable Ananda, who saw the different kinds of behavior of the 5 disciples, commented, "Venerable Sir, while you were expounding the Dhamma, only 1 out of those 5 people were listening attentively." Then Ananda described the different attitudes of the other 4 to the Buddha and asked why they were behaving thus. The Buddha then explained that these people could not get rid of their old habits. In their past existences, the first one was a snake. As a snake usually coils itself up and goes to sleep, so also this man had gone to sleep while listening to the Dhamma. The one who was scratching the earth with his hand had been a subterranean creature. The one who was shaking the tree had been a monkey. The one who was gazing up at the sky had been an astrologer, and the one who was listening attentively to the Dhamma had been a learned Brahmin. The Buddha then said, Ananda, you must remember that one must be attentive and to be able to understand the Dhamma, and that there are many people who cannot understand the Dhamma. Ananda then asked, Venerable Sir, what are the things that prevent people from being able to realize the Dhamma? The Buddha replied, Ananda, passion, or raga, ill will, or dosa, and ignorance, or moha, are the three things that prevent people from realizing the Dhamma. There is no fire like the fire of lust. Passion burns always and without any break. Verse 252. Easy to see are others' faults. Sudasang vajjang anye sang attanopana duddasang pare sang hi so vajjani opunati yathabhu sang attanopana chadeti kalingva kitava sato. Easily seen are others' faults. Hard indeed to see are one's own. Like chaff, one winnows others' faults, but one's own faults one hides, as a crafty fowler conceals himself by camouflage. The rich man, Mendaka. Once, during his tour of the Anga and Uttara regions, the Buddha went to the town of Bhaddiya. He saw in his vision that the time was right for Mendaka, his wife, his son, his daughter-in-law, his granddaughter, and his servant to attain Sotapatti. Mendaka was an extremely rich man. He had found a large number of life-sized golden statues of goats in his backyard. For this reason, he was known as Mendaka, or a goat, the rich man. Mendaka and his family, on hearing that the Buddha was coming to Bhaddiya, went to pay homage to him. After hearing the discourse given by the Buddha, the whole family attained the first stage of sainthood. Mendaka then related how, on his way, some ascetics had spoken ill of the Enlightened One and had tried to dissuade him from coming to see him. The Buddha replied, My disciple, it is natural for people not to see one's own faults and to exaggerate other people's faults and failings. The Buddha then revealed the past existences of Mendaka. In one of his former existences, he had donated a monastery and a congregation hall to Vipassi Buddha. Then, in yet another of his past existences, he was a rich man in Benares. At that time, there was a famine throughout the region. One day, he offered the only food he had left as alms food to a Pacheka Buddha. As a result of this offering, his cooking pot was later found to be miraculously filled up with rice. Verse 253. Defilements multiply in those who seek others' faults. Para vajjanupassissa niccang vijjhana sanyino asavatasya vadhanti araso asavakkaya. He who sees others' faults and is ever irritable, the corruptions of such a one grow. He is far from the destruction of corruptions. The fault-finding monk, Ujjhana Sanyi. Venerable Ujjhana Sanyi was always finding fault and speaking ill of others. The matter was reported to the Buddha, who said, "Bhikkhus, if someone finds fault with another, so as to teach him good ways, it is not an act of evil, and is therefore not blamable. But if someone is always finding fault with others and speaking ill of them just out of spite and malice, he will not attain collectedness of mind and mental absorption, or jhana. He will not be able to understand the Dhamma, and moral defilements, or asavas, will increase in him." Verse 254. There are no aggregates which are eternal. Akase padang nathi samano nathi bahire papancha bhirata paja nippapancha tathagata. In the sky there is no track. Outside there is no saint. Mankind delights in obstacles. The Tathagatas are free from obstacles. Verse 255. There are no saints outside the Dhamma. Akase padang nathi samano nathi bahire sankhara sassata nathi buddhanang injitang. In the sky there is no track. Outside there is no saint. There are no conditioned things that are eternal. There is no instability in the Buddhas. The wandering ascetic, Subhadda. Subhadda, the wandering ascetic, was staying at Kushinara when he heard that the parinibbana of Gautama Buddha would take place that night. He had already put 3 questions which were troubling him to other religious leaders, but their answers did not satisfy him. He had not yet asked Gautama Buddha, and he felt that only the enlightened one could answer his questions. He hurried to the Buddha, but Venerable Ananda tried to persuade him not to go any further. However, the enlightened one overheard their conversation and consented to see Subhadda, who then asked the 3 questions. 1. Are there tracks in the sky? 2. Are there any Arya bhikkhus or samanas outside the teaching of the Buddha? 3. Is there any conditioned thing or sankhara that is permanent? The Buddha replied in the negative to all of the 3 questions.